Good evening, and to the bold alone, welcome back. Tonight we continue the Civilands series with Chapter 7 from Crimson River. This chapter is entitled, What Once Was Whole. I am your host and fearless leader, Nicholas Austin, and you're listening to Tuesday Night Fiction.
You sound will call with spirit true. I swear I'll hear that sound in you.
Haran was now out of sight, and there was no more need to hide. Jeannie felt nothing but relief to be out of the now Keegan-infested town. As they progressed north along the River White, she noticed it had become quite calm, and she could now see through it a little more clearly. For the first time, its rushing waters seemed to flow smoothly over the rocky riverbed, rather than continuously crashing down onto it. Though Jeannie remained in the trailer with Hansa, she eavesdropped intently on Harrison and Dominic, who were walking slightly ahead with Nala. "My father never allowed me to travel as far north as the mountain lands with him," Harrison said. "He always told me it was too dangerous for someone my age." "Yes, I'm sure he was right about that," Dominic replied. "I wouldn't say too dangerous for someone your age as much as it's dangerous for anyone. The peril of the journey is what makes the services your dad offered so valuable to the people of the East. The mountain lands contain many riches. His relationships and skills allowed us to thrive here, sharing in those riches and offering the natives our own." Jeannie inhaled the praise bestowed upon her father. "So how will we make it there on our own?" Harrison asked. Dominic gestured to Hansa and responded. "That's a question better suited for our Vahani guide." Jeannie could feel Hansa sit up a little straighter next to her. "Well," Hansa began to explain, "we must continue to follow the River White north until it leads us to the mountain lands. The problem is that a branch of the river flows alongside the length of the mountain range, so we must cross it to get to the safest path through. There is a man-made bridge crafted by my people that can be used for this, but it is old and, at this time of year, the water is likely to be thinly frozen that far north. It is not a path commonly traveled in the winter. So once we cross the river, will we be traveling safely for the rest of the way?" Harrison asked. "My apologies. When I said safest path, I misspoke," Hansa muttered regrettably. "There is no safe route through the mountain lands by any means. One issue is that the grizzlies are not as prevalent in those parts, so we will have only our pistols for defense prior to reaching the camp of my uncle. The winter weather is also unkind when coupled with the steepness of the icy hills. Really, the only benefits of the path we seek are that it is the closest thing to a flat trail and will guide us in the direction we need to go. Once we make it through, my people will be located in the valley on the other side." Dominic chuckled. "See, my friends," he said, turning to the Morels. "No reason to worry." Despite Dominic's playfulness, Jeannie found many reasons to worry based on Hansa's description. She began to swing her legs, which were hanging over the trailer, in thought. "Look," Hansa followed, "I appreciate you all feeling like you owe me something, but if the journey presents you with a risk that is not worth taking, then please know you can turn around right now. I would not hold it against you if you decided to leave and go back east. That would certainly be the safest option." Jeannie scoffed at this notion. "Harrison and I aren't ever going back east," she declared. "The Murrieta is our home now, so this is the only way. We need you and your people as much as you need us." "She's right," Harrison agreed. "We'll make it through at all costs. It would be far worse for us to live with ourselves if we gave up now." "This is good to hear. It is difficult for me to imagine that I would be able to make it without you all. For now, we should continue on until we reach the branch in the River White where the mountains begin. Once we do, we can make camp while we plan out our way across." "Sounds good to me," Dominic called. As they continued on along the river, Jeannie began to wonder when the crashing of the current would resume. So the comrades have made their way out of Haran and now are headed north to the mountain lands. What will they find there, you might ask? Well, you'll just have to wait and see. For now, let's continue on to part 2 of 3. Day turned to night, and then came back again like the flip of a coin. Following the Keegan raid, the Vahani of the Riverlands pressed on. Latera was watching the rations. They were getting smaller and smaller with each meal. There was so little to go around that 2 of the horses could not make it any further and eventually died of exhaustion. Though there remained a gleaming beauty to the rocky hills they passed, Latera only felt deceived by their eminence. With the lack of food to survive on and the conditions of winter remaining, it was too painful for her to admire anything as she saw her people suffer. What made things even harder, though, was Elon's sudden absence, as Latera had come to think of it. He was present in body, but not in any other significant way. Prior to the raid, he had been so supportive and helpful in guiding and encouraging her people. Yet as the reality of the situation started to sink in, his attitude had dramatically worsened. Latera found herself hurt by the fact that he was so fair weather in his conviction of their success, especially after his strange outburst when he saved her. The distance he purposely wedged between them stung, too, when considering the bond that had been developing between them previously. Something was not right. Something bothered him beyond the hard times her people had come upon. But he would hardly speak to her at all, let alone tell her what it was. Now on her own to encourage the rapidly crumbling spirit of the Vahani men and women, Latera realized that she would need to rely on herself alone for strength. This would be quite the challenge too, since physically she hardly had any left, and emotionally, only her fury at her father's murderers remained. Just as she began to lose feeling in her legs, and as if in an answer to her silent prayer, Lennox suddenly shouted, "A camp! A camp!" Through the snowfall, Latera could not make out if anyone was inside the small gathering of pitched tents, but she could see the camp itself. "That's the Tokali," Elon exerted, a rare bit of excitement in his voice. With his confirmation, the Vahani rushed to the camp, paying no mind to who awaited inside. Fortunately, the camp was abandoned. Not a soul even gave this a second thought, though, as a mad search for any form of sustenance commenced. Wails of joy could be heard throughout, as fair amounts of vegetables, hunted carcasses, and soup were found. "Please," Lennox desperately shouted to no avail. "We must preserve some for the remainder of the road ahead." Replies of discontent rang out. "What we must do is eat. It is your fault we are in this mess in the first place." Latera found she was pleased that the sentiment was starting to swing out of favor of the councilman. It made her confident that she would have the support of the others when it became time to seek justice. Though Lennox's plea had a reason, Latera knew that nothing he did would be able to stop the people from eating until their bellies were full. They had been empty too long to quell the hunger now. Appearing defeated, the councilmen too soon made their own attempts to scrounge for whatever bites they could get. After they satisfied their own stomachs, they made their way over to Castor, who was sitting completely still on his own. Latera, having now found something to hold her over, found a place covertly close by to sit and spy on them. With some of their meal remaining, they walked slowly over to him. He didn't even turn as they approached him. As Latera observed Castor, she noticed how hollow he looked, but she felt no pity. Maybe now he understood the gravity of what he had done. Parrish placed a hand on his arm and still he did not move a muscle. "You need to eat something, Castor," Parrish pleaded. "Here, finish the rest of ours." Finally, Castor turned to the 2 men. "Can I tell the 2 of you something?" Lennox and Parrish exchanged stressed looks. Yes. What is it? Lennox asked.
One evening, when I was a younger man,
Castor whispered.
my father and I went out hunting closer to the mountains. We sat camped out in a brush for some time and eventually saw a passing wolf pack.
Is this going to go somewhere? Parrish asked. Without any pause or reaction to the interruption, Castor continued.
Not long after they emerged, though, another pack reared their heads a little too close by. The first group of wolves didn't like this, obviously, as the second was trespassing on their territory. Then the intimidation tactics began. My father could tell awfully quickly which two wolves were the respective alphas. Those two are calling the shots, he told me, pointing them out. No doubt about it. Then he looked upon the wolves in shame, because he knew what was coming next. After some more growling and carrying on, sure enough, they charged at each other.
Parrish suddenly got up and stormed off. Where are you? Lennox began, but Castor still continued.
Needless to say, not many survived this battle, and the two alphas were actually the first ones to go. Those that did survive limped off and hardly maintained the strength to do so. When they had all gone, my father looked at me, and you know what he said?
Lennox, now glaring at him blankly, shook his head.
He told me that what I had seen was justice. But it was justice only because the alphas had died. They attempted to achieve something positive for their respective packs, but put those they were meant to protect in danger in order to do so. And therefore, they deserved the consequences. Now do not get me wrong, he said to me. They are animals, and they lack the ability to understand the concept of peaceful resolution, which is what separates us from them. However, some men, weak men, still attempt to accomplish things the same way as these wolves.
I can see how you might see us as the wolves, Castor, but
the last thing he said, though, has been stuck in my head ever since. It rings like bells, both when I sleep and when I'm awake. What he said was, no matter the outcome, even if every member of the pack had survived, as people who have the ability to communicate, it is our duty to do so in the face of conflict. Unfortunately, there are far more of us in this world that fail to understand that than those that grasp it. So often we are no better than the wolves. But you, son, you must be better.
Finally, showing emotion, Castor began to well up and shrieked at Lennox.
It is as if I have learned nothing. Like every lesson that has come my way has been wasted.
Well, maybe you have, Lennox replied angrily, seemingly giving up on getting through to Castor at least initially. Even if a wrong decision was made, though, we can only correct it by trying our best to now do what is right. Can you not see that? Castor stared at him without a word and scoffed. Within an instant, though, his expression once again seemed to fade away.
It is too late for that,
he whispered.
It is far too late.
It was in that moment that Latera could see the councilman had become a man without a name. A person who had accepted his fate and become nothing. Castor was now gone, and as Lennox finally turned away from the figure that sat in his place, she wondered if anyone would be safe from whoever it was that remained. Once the councilmen were all departed, Latera left her spot to see if she could find more food. It wasn't pleasant, this desperation. It was magnified by how messy she felt. Since arriving at this camp, she'd let her hair fall loose. And though it was somewhat freeing, she had always been accustomed to it being held together to some degree. Brought back to her hunger, she eventually came to a tent that seemed to be empty. When she entered, however, she heard someone jump inside. She became on edge over the aggressive action, but her stomach dropped when she saw that it was Elon. "Are you going to stay and talk to me?" she asked coldly after an initial period of silence. "Or are you going to scurry off and continue to avoid me? I know that is what you are doing, Elon." He carried on with his search for food. "I am not purposely avoiding you, Latera," he exhaled. "I know I have not been helping you lately. Ever since what happened, I am just worried and hungry like everyone else. The thought that after my whole journey I might not make it back to the people counting on me is horrifying. It has kept me preoccupied. And I am sorry." She felt her compassion stir, realizing that they shared a similar weight of responsibility to their people, and she tried to comfort him. "That makes sense to me, and I cannot fault you for that. But you must be honest with me and tell me that up front then," she pleaded. "I am carrying the weight of boosting morale on my own, and this is a journey you asked us to make. It hurts to see you lose faith in it." She paused. "And I have missed your friendship." "Friendship?" he started. "No, I am not your friend, Latera. I am least of all that." He scratched his head a moment and then finally addressed her. "For the sake of the mother, can you not sense I have feelings for you? I have wanted to tell you." "Elon, no. Let me finish this piece. I take it back. I may have had feelings for you, but they are senseless. We could never be together. And that is all that matters. Before this moment, I did not know how to be honest with myself about it, let alone with you," he declared. "I placed distance between us to quiet my own feelings. Our people, they are just too different. Though we want to unite as tribes, my family and friends wouldn't look favorably upon a relationship between us. Who knows? Maybe my lack of spine in this means I never truly cared for you at all. I probably never did and never will. Or maybe... Who knows? It does not matter. All I know is there would only be hurt down the path for us. I think I am beginning to realize that this whole journey, everything about it, it's more complicated and challenging than I thought." Latera paused, digesting his words. "I was beginning to like you too, Elon. But..." She took a breath. "We can just be friends. We can just be the allies our people plan to be. And I have no problem with that. If you need time to distance yourself from any other feelings, I understand. But please just say that to me. There is no need for dishonesty here." "No dishonesty, you say? Well then. Yes, we are allies, Latera," Elon murmured. "But we are nothing more than that. We can be nothing more than that. We cannot even be friends." At this, Latera felt the pain and anger pour into her. She'd already lost so much and now she couldn't even keep her only remaining friend on this journey? Why couldn't Elon maintain their friendship? The other feelings were new and young, and they could be put to rest. She agreed to lay them aside. Why couldn't he? She needed a friend more than a lover right now, and their friendship had been the strongest aspect of their relationship. The trust they'd formed. That was precious in these treacherous times. Latera could see that Elon didn't want to have to say the things he did. There was no hiding that. But whatever it was he had truly felt, though, it didn't matter. Not if this was his final decision. "You know, you really are no hero," she sharply replied. "You made this journey thinking you would become one, but what have you really become besides lost, Elon? A hero puts the needs of others before his own.
And now things have gotten hard, and all you have done is buckle. Do you even realize what I have been through? I lost my father, and I thought I lost my brother. Though guess what? Turns out my brother is actually alive. Turns out he escaped the wrath of the same gutless councilman who betrayed our father and their own leader and then lied to our people. My brother lives. Yet even though I am apart from him, apart from the only family I have left, I put my people first. Even if it means quietly following the despicable men that murdered my father to do so. Elon was speechless and his mouth dropped wide open at this revelation. But please, take your time to get over your feelings and confusion. As for me, I will make sure we survive with or without you and your Easterner attitude. For the sake of the mother you have the nerve to say to me, you know nothing of the mother. You would be as damned in her eyes as you are in mine. Now excuse me. I have a camp of people who I need to go stand up for because no one else will. With that, she exited the tent as quickly as she could and left Elon behind, standing frozen in his place. As she stormed off, initially intending to find her own shelter, she was shocked but empowered by the fire she found inside her. Her path ultimately led her out of the campsite entirely, where she came to the base of a rocky hill. Though it was steep and did not provide a clear path of footing, Latera climbed it. Several times she slipped on the smooth but dirty rocks, acquiring bumps and bruises on the way up. The more she fell, the more calculated her next maneuvers around the stair-like edges became. After completing the maze-like climb, she finally reached the top. Before her stood the massive landscape they'd left behind them, the path of their journey now carved into it. Rolling hills that told the story of her travels thus far were blanketed in trees and a layer of snow. Though the scope of her vision was finite, the emotions and weight of her frame was endless. Latera now stood above it all. There on her perch she was higher than the Riverlands, higher than the councilman, higher than Elon and all those who had wronged her thus far. Then, peering down at the marks she had made on her way up, she smiled. She hadn't received these new scars. She'd earned them. If she only kept climbing higher, the smaller everything and everyone below her would look. So ends one of my favorite scenes from Crimson River. As Latera faces betrayal left and right, she rises above, climbing the cliffs, and looks out on where she's been, and can be proud of where she's going. For a fun fact, the climb itself actually was inspired by my own hills here in Austin, Texas. For similarly majestic views, I highly recommend to visit. And if you want more, let's keep going. Part 3 of 3. Let's find out what happens next. After days of trekking north along the River White, Dominic and his troop had finally reached the branch of the river they'd need to cross over to get to the mountains. The camp they made once they arrived sat at the beginning of an open field, which looked out on the river and mountains. As light began to fill the sky, Dominic admired the snow-capped mountain peaks, which did not even look real behind the large icy river. It was all so majestic and made him feel a great relief at its peacefulness. He thought that maybe this was his reward for having found a better solution in disorienting the guard back in Haran rather than taking his life. As he beheld the scenic view, he brought his hands together, but this time it was only to rub them against one another. "Eat something, my friends," Dominic urged. He passed the children cooked squirrels, which he had hunted earlier in the morning. "You'll need your strength for what's to come." They all grabbed their share and dug in. At one point, Harrison looked up from his meal and toward the river.
Should we come up with a strategy? He asked.
Strategy for what? Dominic replied.
Well, there are 4 of us, as well as a horse and trailer with a fair stock of supplies in it. So shouldn't we determine a strategy for getting across that bridge? Harrison answered as he gestured at the size of their group. It was a good point, Dominic thought. Yet Hansa, the most familiar with his people's bridge and crossing it, responded first. Yes, we should cross one at a time. Periodically, the Vahini work to repair the bridge. However, it has been some time since our last repair, as we do not do so in the winter months. We typically avoid the trip altogether at this time of year, so there would be no use repairing it at the end of autumn. Good to hear, Dominic joked, trying to make light of the perilous situation. He believed that humor made every challenge easier to bear. As much as he could tell, Hansa did not get the jokes about his language barrier as much as Jeannie and Harrison did. We'll go one at a time then until we've all crossed. The biggest challenge will be getting the horse and carriage across. As for the supplies, we can remove them and carry them by hand. I'm not sure that we'd be able to handle the journey physically if we had to carry all the supplies all the way through the mountains. So the carriage will be necessary. Also, and I hate to say this, but in the interest of making it with the least amount of weight on the bridge, our best bet might be to have Jeannie lead Nala over. Absolutely not, Harrison shouted. I nearly lost my sister already, and I won't knowingly put her in harm's way. Believe me, Dominic pleaded, hating to always have to be the bearer of difficult news. I'd never wish to do so either, but it could be the only way. Like I said before, Hansa said, this journey was mine to make. If there is anyone who should guide the horse across, it should be me. That is very fair and honorable of you. Harrison started to commend the boy, though Dominic had his doubts. No, Jeannie interrupted as she looked at her brother. It's too dangerous for him. I'm by far the lightest. Look, Harrison, I know you want to keep me safe, but safety isn't a luxury we've enjoyed for some time now. Things won't get any easier, and this won't be the last time I'll be forced into a situation for our survival. Dominic found himself repeatedly impressed by little Jeannie's bravery. No way, Harrison sighed. You're very brave, Jeannie, but I can't have this while your safety is my responsibility. I won't let anything happen to you, not again. I believe the bridge should hold if we do it this way, Harrison, Dominic assured him. But like you said, we won't let anything happen to her under any circumstances. Again, I'm her guardian, not you, Harrison angrily replied. Despite what you've done for her, she also told me about the incident with the knives. And I can't just allow her to be in a situation where she can be harmed. Harrison, stop it, Jeannie shouted. There is no avoiding danger for any of us, and you aren't the boss of me, even with Mother and Father gone. I'm crossing that bridge with the load because it's what needs to happen for us to continue on, and we sure as hellfire are going to continue on. The stubbornness of this girl, Harrison gestured to the others as he pointed to her. Dominic chuckled as their sibling testiness came out. Fine. You can go, but only once I've determined it's safe. Just as Jeannie was about to object, Harrison stopped her with a hand in the air. That's as much crap as I'm going to take about it, and as much ground as I'm going to cede. All right, Dominic started once he believed that they were through. Now if you're all finished with your meals, we should gather our things and go. And so they did. Once all of their camping supplies were placed into the carriage, they began their march across the open field toward the river. Dominic couldn't help but look back at the edge of the wooded area where their camp had been. He dreamt of a day when Haran could be back to the way it was. And it saddened him to be leaving it and the last remnant of the Riverlands behind him for a while. Finally, they reached a bank that led to the small cliff over the water. Jeannie nervously crept by him to look over the edge. He noted that the river could not have been more than 5 feet below where they stood. But he could see that the fall would be the least of their worries. The layer of ice that covered the river was so thin that he could almost make out the unfrozen water that was flowing beneath. There would be no hope if any of them were to fall in, he thought. They'd be swept under the ice in a moment. Which brought him to the next dilemma, the bridge. The wooden bridge that crossed over the ice creaked as the wind blew, and although it was wide enough to accommodate the horse and trailer, its strength was another question. Underneath it, he could see the beams that gave it whatever support it did have, but they provided little comfort. He sighed and noted that the Morels' faces consisted of all different shades of pale. Hansa seemed to be the only one confident in the bridge his people had constructed, though he admitted that it was not in its best condition. "Let's begin unloading," Dominic muttered. The group began taking all of the supplies out of the carriage. Dominic grabbed all of his illusionist wares, as he was the only one with the knowledge of the most efficient way of bundling them for transport. Harrison followed by gathering the food and cooked goods, while Hansa bagged all the remaining necessities such as clothing and the like. Once everything had been removed, Jeannie took a deep breath, preparing herself, but Harrison broke her concentration as she exhaled. "I'm crossing first," he declared, to which the others looked puzzled. "In the off chance that this bridge isn't strong enough to hold whatsoever, I'd much rather it be me that falls in than Jeannie. This way, if I do make it, we can be on both sides to help her as she crosses." Dominic respected Harrison's drive to protect his sister, though he was not surprised considering that he was Adonis's son. "That would be wise," Hansa responded. "Since you are lighter than Jeannie and her load, you should be able to make it and get a grasp on whether her weight will hold." Harrison gave a nod of approval to Hansa and Dominic. He then made his way over to Jeannie to give her a hug, but she grumpily refused. Harrison wasn't kidding about her stubbornness, Dominic thought to himself. There was no denying how headstrong she was. Harrison looked down sadly for a moment, but then continued on toward the bridge. "The first step is always the greatest obstacle, Harrison," Dominic encouraged him. "Once you take it, you'll realize that the matter of doing the rest will no longer be hindered by your doubts." Harrison took one last breath, looked up, and took the first step out onto the bridge. The creaking got slightly more pronounced as he crept along. The wind was picking up. Though the path was wide enough, his occasional peering below and the wobbling of the planks made it look like he was performing a balancing act on a single beam. With each step, the tension rose. As he got closer to the other side, though, Hansa began cheering him on. Once the danger of the walk became more evident, Dominic noticed Jeannie's attitude changed, and she began to cheer as well. "Only about 20 more paces," Dominic shouted, aiming to encourage the young man. Soon enough, those 20 paces were 10, then 5, and then 0. "You did it!" Jeannie shouted with joy across to him. Harrison lifted a thumb in the air as he knelt down to catch his breath. "Well?" Dominic called. "What do you think?" When he rose, Harrison shook his head. "She can't do it with the horse and carriage," he declared sadly. "We might have no choice but to leave the carriage and string up as much of our supplies for Nala to carry as we can." This complicated things, but they would deal with one obstacle at a time. Dominic walked Jeannie over to Nala and put her hand where it needed to be to guide the animal. "You want to hold her here and hold her firmly," he explained. "If you show her you're confident, she'll be confident in you." "How am I supposed to focus on that when I have this bridge to cross?" she asked. "Before I ran into your friend Hansa here, I was just about ready to give up on this place," he recalled to her with a smile. "I was sure that I had no home anymore and that there'd be nothing that was worth coming back to. But when I did meet this boy and found out that you were alive, I found hope. I realized once again that this place was worth fighting for. Who would have thought that 2 children could have given that to a grown and traveled man like myself? Let me tell you something. Neither of you are ordinary. You're both exceptional, and you have no reason to be anything but confident in yourselves, because it's you that keeps everyone's hope alive." Jeannie looked to Hansa. "You can do this. Hansa encouraged her. With a deep breath, she turned to look out to Harrison.
I'm ready, she said in a determined tone.
Just as Dominic had shown her, Jeannie guided the horse as firmly as she could to the bridge. As she stood there, she looked up to her brother again at the other end. You can do this, Jeannie, he encouraged her. Just walk toward me one step at a time. With this last bit of advice, she took the first step. Her pace was extremely slow and careful, but her ability to remain still with the steed in hand amazed Dominic. He and the boys cheered her on as her march across began. Then, from just beyond where they had been camped, a small group of birds rose into the sky. Dominic looked up toward it, horrified that Jeannie would become distracted. Still staring up into the air, he asked Hansa frantically, "Can you call to them and get them to fly in the other direction?" Hansa was way ahead of him, and already on a knee whispering. The birds were still moving closer, though Jeannie had not yet noticed. Hansa's whispers began to increase in volume and severity, but still the birds came. Dominic was nearly ready to make a diversion attempt of his own, when suddenly he noticed the birds had begun turning around. "Great job, Hansa," he hailed. The boy's demeanor shifted immediately. "No," he replied, shaking his head. 3 shots immediately rang out through the field, and Dominic heard their impact with the tree trunk just above his head. Almost simultaneously came a shriek from Nala. The terrified horse stood up into the air and hastily but carefully began trotting to the other side. Jeannie was knocked off her feet and dragged with the screeching horse. "Jeannie!" Harrison screamed at the top of his lungs. His pistol was still holstered at his side, with all of his attention on his sister, who was now cowering and crying under the beast. She had compacted herself into a tight ball to try to protect her head from Nala's hooves as well as the bridge, but her back was hitting every plank with a ferocity as she was dragged along. She appeared too shocked or terrified to let go, but considering that Nala could collapse the bridge at any moment with her careful but heavy trots, it was likely better that Jeannie attempted to make it across with her. With the gunshots, the horses screeching, and the sight of Jeannie, Dominic was in shock. His ears rang from the bullets, which came too close for comfort, even if they were rather inaccurate. Hansa came running to him and pulled him to cover behind the trailer. Dominic looked out again in despair at Jeannie and Nala. Then, as another round of shots came, one piercing their cover, his rage overtook him. He pulled out his pistol and continuously unloaded it in the direction of the woods. Next to him, Hansa was whispering fiercely again. With the continued commotion, Nala began to panic even more. The horse suddenly stopped, paralyzed in the center of the bridge, too afraid to cross but still stepping back and forth erratically. Realizing his chance to act, Harrison feverishly ran onto the bridge to retrieve Jeannie. Just as he approached her, however, Nala rose into the air onto her hind legs, and a snap of wood cracked through the air. Half the width of the plank bridge on which the horse stood collapsed underneath its weight. Much to Dominic's dismay, Nala plunged into the ice, which smashed open underneath her weight. Though Jeannie had instinctively let go of the horse, the force of Nala's plummet caused her to stumble forward into the gap of the bridge. "Harrison, please!" Dominic heard her cry as she fell. "No!" Harrison shouted as he lunged toward her. His sister now hung for dear life to the edge of the half-broken planks that the horse had destroyed. Harrison slid to her side swiftly as he could and grabbed her arms to pull her to safety. "You're gonna be all right, Jeannie," Dominic heard Harrison promise Jeannie as he carried her to the other side. Once there, the siblings found cover, but not before Dominic saw Harrison reaching for his pistol. Good, he thought. He and Hansa would be grateful for the help. After a third round of shots, Dominic and Hansa could hear roaring and screams. Hansa stayed in his place as he continued to perform his ritual, but Dominic saw his chance to move. He was too livid to leave it be. The bastards had nearly killed Jeannie and they had taken Nala from him. He sprinted across the field and soon came upon the location of the gunfire, though now the scene was only the remnants of a vile attack of Hansa's grizzlies. The weapons and bodies of 2 men before him lay in a pile on the ground. Their bones were shattered and their flesh torn apart. Dominic accepted violence when it was necessary, but did not enjoy it by any means. Vengeance was something he did enjoy, though, and he soaked it in until he suddenly recalled that there were 3 shots being fired at a time. Before he could react, he was tackled to the ground from behind. The person on top of him furiously rained punches down on his face. He could hear the exhausted man's heavy breathing and could tell he was weakened. After taking several blows, he began to fight back, recalling his desire for vengeance. Now he could see that his attacker was none other than Colin McCormick, the guard who he had knocked unconscious. "But I let you live," Dominic blurted as they wrestled against each other. "Biggest mistake of your life," Colin exerted. "You thought you could make a fool of me and get away with it? Fat fucking chance." He then delivered a devastating right hook to Dominic's face, knocking him dizzily to the ground. "I gave you a second chance then. Why are you doing this?" Dominic answered, lying still on his back. Looking to his right, he noticed a butt of one of the bear-smashed guns was in his reach. To distract his attacker, he added, "Want to see a trick?" "You've got some nerve thinking you could pull that shit on me again, Dragon Boy." Colin coughed, and Dominic shifted his weight closer to the gun, keeping his eyes on the Keegan man. "Maybe you think you're a comedian now, too," Colin continued. "Well, hey, I got a joke for you." Then, before Dominic could blink, Colin pounced on top of him and wrapped his hands around his throat. For a few seconds, Dominic let the man squeeze, easing him into a sense of victory. Then, in one fluid movement, he grabbed the weapon and swiftly smashed it twice into Colin's face. "Fuck!" Colin screamed as he fell to the ground, clearly struggling to remain conscious. Colin's face was beaten severely to the point that it was almost unrecognizable. Though he had prevented his attacker from strangling him to death, Dominic had wasted every bit of energy he had left to do so. The beating he'd taken when Colin had initially launched on him was taking its toll. On the verge of losing consciousness himself, Dominic turned and was relieved to see Hansa running through the field in their direction. "You know what?" Colin spoke as he managed to rise to his feet. "This was actually pretty fun. In fact, this was more entertainment than I've had since I first came here." The man was insane, Dominic thought, casting a wary eye at him. Then Colin smiled. "You and we aren't nearly done. I heard those youngsters calling each other's names on that bridge. I'll look forward to seeing you and those Morel kids again very soon, Nicholas. You've made a mistake here, and you'll be making a bigger one if you try finding me again." Dominic struggled to sit up, rage pumping through him at the threat to the Morel children. He needed a weapon. 2 chances were enough. "My name isn't Nicholas either. It's Dominic Turner. Remember that, motherfucker!" Dominic reached for his discarded pistol and raised it to Colin, but the man was gone, scurrying off back from whence he came. Dominic would never make the shot through the trees. He collapsed back on the ground, the immense pain hitting him just as Hansa finally came running up to him. "Are the others all right?" Dominic asked. "As much as they can be given the circumstances, yes," the boy replied. "But are you? You're covered in blood." "I'll make it," Dominic said. "I have no other choice." And so ends what is, as mentioned, one of my favorite chapters in Crimson River, Chapter 7, What Was Once Whole. Thanks as always for listening in. I'd like to start off this outro by saying that I am changing up the terms of a previously mentioned giveaway. Rather than giving away a copy of all 4 books of the Civilands series once Book 4 Cryptic Kingdom comes out, I'm going to be giving away 10 copies of books 1 through 4 of the Civilands series. And by 10 copies, I don't mean books 1 to 4 2 times and then books 1 and 2. I mean 40 books. I'm giving away 40 books. This is only going to be an Instagram giveaway. I'm going to be posting the details of the giveaway, and it's going to be as simple as tagging some friends and following my page. And also getting your friends to follow my page. That simple. 10 people are going to win. I will announce at that time as also the date of the release of Cryptic Kingdom. The winners will get signed copies of all 4 books in the Civilands series, and they will get them before the actual release date of Cryptic Kingdom. That's right, you're going to get book 4 before it actually comes out. So keep an eye out on Instagram and get ready to tag some friends. Get ready to win some books. Because most likely if you comment, you're going to win. It's that simple. Anyway, thanks as always again for listening in. If you are interested and don't want to wait for that giveaway, you can always buy my books on Amazon in ebook or paperback. If you enjoy the series or if you've already read it and enjoyed it and you want to give it 5 stars, go head on over to Amazon and do so. If you're enjoying this podcast, feel free to like, share, and subscribe on whatever podcatcher you listen to or YouTube. And tell your friends. We here in the Civil Gang are proud to welcome new members, but we welcome the bold alone. So be ready to learn and be ready to grow and be ready for an adventure. Next week we'll talk more about why this was my favorite chapter and about a couple other things. There's a lot going on right now, and there always will be a lot going on, and we're going to dissect all of it, and we're going to do so together. Because we stick together here. So I wish you a happy Tuesday night, a happy Wednesday night, Thursday night, whenever you're listening in. I hope you have a great night, and I'll talk to you again next Tuesday. This has been Nicholas Austin with the Tuesday Night Fiction Podcast. Good night.
The sound will call you, spirit true. I swear I'll hear that sound in you.
The Tuesday Night Fiction Podcast, the Civilands series, and the musical score for the podcast